The gunshot echoed across the plains as Delilah Hayes sprinted through the tall grass, her heart pounding against her ribs like a desperate animal trying to escape its cage. Blood trickled down her arm where the bullet had grazed her, but she couldn't afford to stop, not with Thomas Whitley and his men still on her trail. The year was 1876, and in the unforgiving territory of Wyoming, a woman on the run had few allies and even fewer chances. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape as Delilah spotted a small creek ahead. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but the sound of distant hoofbeats drove her forward. She'd been running for 3 days since escaping Whitley's saloon in Cheyenne, where she'd been held against her will after her father's debts had been called in. Plunging into the shallow water, she followed the creek northward, hoping to throw off the scent for the tracking dogs. The water was frigid despite the summer heat, sending shocks of cold through her blistered feet. Her once fine dress, the one Whitley had insisted she wear while serving drinks in his establishment, was torn and mudded, but that was the least of her concerns. As darkness fell, Delilah spotted a flickering light in the distance. A campfire. She hesitated, weighing her options. Another encounter with men could prove more dangerous than continuing alone, but exhaustion and hunger were taking their toll. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Drawing closer, she kept to the shadows, observing the solitary figure tending the fire. A lone cowboy sat with his back to her, seemingly preoccupied with cooking something that smelled incredible to her starving senses. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, was tethered nearby, occasionally nickering softly into the night. Delilah stepped on a dry branch, the snap cutting through the quiet evening air. The cowboy was on his feet in an instant, his revolver drawn with a speed that spoke of years of practice. "Who's there?" His deep voice called out, steady and commanding. Delilah considered running but knew she wouldn't get far. Slowly she stepped into the circle of firelight, hands raised to show she carried no weapon. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse from thirst. "I mean no harm. I'm just—" She swayed on her feet, the world suddenly tilting sideways as days of running, fear, and hunger finally caught up with her. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the sight of concerned blue eyes and the feeling of strong arms catching her before she hit the ground. When Delilah awoke, she was wrapped in a warm blanket near the fire. The cowboy sat across from her, his features clearer now in the dancing firelight. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jawline partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were well worn but clean, the mark of a man who took pride in himself despite the harsh realities of life on the frontier. "You're awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I was starting to worry." Delilah tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her arm. The cowboy moved to help her, but she recoiled instinctively, fear flashing in her eyes. He paused, then slowly raised his hands to show he intended no harm. "I cleaned and bandaged your wound while you were unconscious. It's not deep, but it could have gotten infected if left untreated." Delilah glanced at her arm, now neatly wrapped in a clean cloth. "Thank you," she said cautiously. "Name's Vincent James," he said, returning to his side of the fire. "Most folks call me Vince." "Delilah Hayes," she replied after a moment's hesitation. He nodded, then gestured to a tin plate beside her. "There's stew if you're hungry. Nothing fancy, but it's hot." Her stomach growled loudly at the mention of food, and despite her wariness, she reached for the plate. The stew was simple beans, dried beef, and a few wild onions, but it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. "Someone's after you," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. Delilah paused mid-bite, considering how much to reveal. "Yes, bad trouble," She met his gaze across the flames. The worst kind. Vincent nodded, accepting her vague answer without pressing. I'm heading to Benton, over in Sweetwater County. Got a small ranch there. You're welcome to ride with me if you need somewhere to lay low for a while. Why would you help me? Delilah asked, suspicion evident in her voice. You don't know me. I could be a criminal for all you know. A small smile tugged at the corner of Vincent's mouth. Are you? No, she said firmly. But that doesn't answer my question. Vincent poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. My ma raised me to believe you help folks in need. Don't need more reason than that. He looked up, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. Besides, seems to me a woman running alone through Wyoming territory with a bullet graze might have good reason to be running. Delilah studied him, searching for any sign of deception. All her life, men had wanted something from her. Her father had used her as collateral for his gambling debts, and Whitley had seen her as property to be used for profit. This stranger's apparent kindness made her uneasy simply because it was unfamiliar. I've never known kindness from a man, she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Vincent's expression softened, a mixture of surprise and sadness crossing his features. Then let me be the first, he said simply. Delilah didn't respond, but she finished her stew in silence, occasionally glancing up at the cowboy who had offered help with seemingly no expectations. We should get some sleep, Vincent eventually said. It's a 3-day ride to Benton if the weather holds. He stood and retrieved another blanket from his saddlebags. You take that side of the fire. I'll stay over here. True to his word, Vincent kept his distance, settling down on the opposite side of the campfire. Delilah lay awake for a long time, watching him through the flames. Despite her exhaustion, years of learned wariness made it difficult to truly rest in the presence of a stranger, especially a man. But eventually, the steady rhythm of Vincent's breathing and the knowledge that for the first time in days, she wasn't being actively pursued lulled her into sleep. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong and the gentle nickering of Vincent's horse. Delilah opened her eyes to find the cowboy already awake, brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. The aroma made her stomach growl. Morning, Vincent said, nodding in her direction. Sleep well. Better than I expected, Delilah admitted, sitting up and adjusting her disheveled hair. Thank you for not. She trailed off, unsure how to express her gratitude that he'd simply let her sleep undisturbed. Understanding flickered in Vincent's eyes. No need for thanks. Coffee. She accepted the tin cup he offered, wrapping her fingers around it for warmth. The morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of another hot day ahead. We should head out soon, Vincent said, packing up his meager camp supplies. If someone's tracking you, they might have picked up your trail by now. Fear knotted in Delilah's stomach at the reminder. Mr. James, I should tell you the men after me are dangerous. If you're caught helping me, it could go badly for you. Vincent paused in his work, regarding her steadily. I figured as much, and it's just Vince. He resumed rolling his blanket. Way I see it, we all have choices to make. I've made mine. They'll kill you, Delilah said bluntly. They can try, he replied with such quiet confidence that Delilah found herself believing him. Now can you ride? Yes, though it's been some time. Vincent nodded. You'll ride with me then. Duster here can carry us both. He patted the chestnut stallion's neck affectionately. An hour later they were heading northwest, Delilah seated behind Vincent on his horse. She'd initially tried to maintain as much distance as possible between them, but the realities of riding double on a moving horse soon had her reluctantly holding onto his waist for stability. Mind telling me who's after you? Vincent asked as they crossed a wide expanse of prairie. Might help to know what we're dealing with. Delilah hesitated, then decided he deserved the truth if he was risking his life. Thomas Whitley. He owns a saloon in Cheyenne, among other businesses. My father owed him money from gambling. When he couldn't pay, Whitley took me as payment. She felt Vincent stiffen slightly beneath her hands but continued. I was forced to work in his saloon, serving drinks to his customers. But Whitley had other plans for me once I'd been there long enough. 3 nights ago, he tried to. He said it was time I started earning my keep in other ways. Her voice hardened. I broke a bottle over his head and ran. Good, Vincent said with such vehemence that Delilah was momentarily startled. He has men who work for him, hired guns, and he's connected with the territorial officials. That's why I couldn't go to the law. Vincent nodded. Whitley. I've heard the name. Nasty reputation. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk the only sounds breaking the vastness of the prairie. What about you? Delilah eventually asked. What's in Benton? Like I said, got a small ranch there. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Was my uncle's before he passed last year, left it to me in his will. You weren't there before, Vincent shook his head. Was riding with cattle drives mostly. Texas to Kansas, sometimes up to Wyoming or Montana. Didn't plan on settling down, but when Uncle Frank died, seemed like the right time to try something new. No wife waiting for you? The question slipped out before Delilah could stop it. Vincent chuckled. No, madam. No wife, no sweetheart. Just me and about 40 head of cattle, if the hands I hired haven't let them all wander off. By midday, the sun was beating down mercilessly. Vincent steered Duster toward a copse of cottonwood trees alongside a small stream, offering welcome shade. We'll rest here a bit, he said, dismounting and then offering Delilah a hand down. Let Duster drink and graze. Delilah accepted his help, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her chest when his strong hands briefly encircled her waist. Once on solid ground, she winced at the stiffness in her legs and back. Not used to riding anymore, she explained, stretching carefully. It'll get easier, Vincent replied, leading his horse to the stream. Benton's still a good ways off. As Duster drank, Vincent retrieved some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. Not much of a meal, but it'll keep us going. They sat in the dappled shade, the cottonwood leaves rustling gently overhead. For the first time in months, Delilah felt something close to peace. Tell me about your ranch, she said, curious about this man who had upended his solitary journey to help a stranger. Vincent's face brightened. It's in a nice valley, good water from the river year-round. The house needs work. Uncle Frank wasn't much for maintenance in his later years, but the bones are solid. Got about 100 acres of good grazing land, with hills to the north that keep the worst winter storms at bay. The pride in his voice was evident, and Delilah found herself smiling at his enthusiasm. Sounds lovely, she said sincerely. It could be, Vincent agreed, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. Once it's fixed up proper. Delilah was about to respond when Vincent suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. She followed his gaze across the stream where a dust cloud was visible in the distance. Riders, he said quietly. Could be nothing, but we shouldn't take chances. They quickly packed up, and Vincent helped Delilah mount before swinging up behind her this time, placing her between his arms as he took the reins. Hold tight, he murmured, and urged Duster into a canter, heading for a line of hills to the west where the terrain would make them harder to track. For hours they rode, sometimes at a gallop when the ground allowed, other times picking their way carefully through rocky terrain. Vincent seemed to have an innate sense of direction, never hesitating at crossroads or questioning his chosen path. As dusk approached, He guided them into a narrow canyon where a small spring bubbled from the rocks, creating a hidden oasis of sorts. "We should be safe here for the night," Vincent said as they dismounted. "Natural walls, only one way in or out, and I know how to hide our tracks." Delilah watched as he efficiently set up camp, impressed by his wilderness skills. "You've done this before," she observed. "Spent most of my life outdoors," he replied, gathering wood for a small, concealed fire. "My pa was a trapper before he settled down with my ma. Taught me how to live on the land before he died." "How old were you when you lost him?" Delilah asked softly. 12. Fever took him one winter. Ma lasted another 10 years before her heart gave out. He spoke matter-of-factly, but Delilah sensed the old pain beneath his words. "I'm sorry," she said. "I lost my mother when I was young too, just 8. My father, well, he tried in his way, I suppose, but the gambling took hold of him after she died." Vincent nodded, understanding. Grief does strange things to a person. They ate a simple meal of beans and the last of Vincent's jerky, the small fire casting long shadows against the canyon walls. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, Delilah found herself increasingly comfortable in Vincent's presence. His quiet strength and straightforward manner were unlike any man she'd known before. "What will you do?" Vincent asked suddenly. "After we reach Benton, I mean. Do you have family elsewhere you can go to?" Delilah stared into the flames, considering his question. "No, no family. I haven't thought much beyond escaping Whitley, to be honest." She looked up, meeting his gaze across the fire. "I don't have much in the way of skills except serving drinks and occasionally singing. My mother taught me to read and write, and I'm good with numbers." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "Benton's growing. The new railroad spurs bringing in more folks. Might be work at the general store or the school when it opens." "You'd help me find work?" Delilah asked, surprised by his continued willingness to assist her. "Of course," he replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Later, as they settled down to sleep on opposite sides of the dying fire, Delilah found herself studying Vincent's profile in the fading light. There was something about him, a fundamental decency that challenged everything she thought she knew about men. "Vince," she said quietly, testing his name on her lips for the first time. He responded, already half asleep. "Thank you for everything." He turned his head slightly to look at her, a small smile touching his lips. "Get some sleep, Delilah. Tomorrow's another long day." The next morning dawned cloudy, promising rain later in the day. They set out early, Delilah once again seated behind Vincent on Duster. The terrain gradually changed as they rode northwest, the open prairie giving way to more varied landscapes with rolling hills and occasional stands of pine and aspen. Around midday, the skies opened up, rain pouring down in sheets. Vincent guided them to a small cave he knew from previous journeys, where they took shelter to wait out the worst of the storm. Inside the cave, they laid out their wet outer clothing to dry near a small fire Vincent built near the entrance, where the smoke could escape. Delilah shivered in her damp dress, and without comment, Vincent handed her his dry wool blanket. "What about you?" she asked, hesitating to take it. "I've got another," he lied smoothly, turning to rummage in his saddlebags so she wouldn't see the truth. Delilah wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, inhaling the scent of leather, pine, and something uniquely Vincent that clung to the fabric. It was oddly comforting. "The storm might last a while," Vincent said, glancing out at the dark skies, "but it'll wash away any tracks we've left." "That's good." Delilah nodded, watching as he carefully tended the small fire. "How much further to Benton?" "If we ride hard tomorrow, we could make it by nightfall," Vincent replied, "though Duster might appreciate a more leisurely pace. He's carrying double after all." "He's a fine horse," Delilah said, reaching out to stroke the stallion's velvety nose as he stood nearby, also taking shelter from the rain. "Best I've ever had," Vincent agreed with obvious affection. "Raised him from a colt. His dam was my uncle's prized mare." As the afternoon wore on, the rain continued unabated. They talked more freely than before, the enforced proximity of the cave breaking down some of the remaining barriers between them. Vincent told stories of his days on cattle drives, the characters he'd met, and the vast territories he'd traveled. Delilah shared memories of her mother, who had taught music before marrying, and her childhood in St. Louis before her father's wanderlust and gambling had brought them west. "Do you miss it?" Vincent asked. "City life, I mean." Delilah considered the question. "Some parts. The theaters, the music. Books were easier to come by." She smiled wistfully. "But there's something about this country, the vastness of it, the wildness that speaks to something in me. Even when I was afraid for my life these past days, I couldn't help noticing how beautiful it all is." Vincent nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why I never went back east, even when I could have. Some folks call this country harsh and unforgiving, but to me, it's honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not." "Like some people do," Delilah murmured. "Exactly." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different paths. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Vincent rose to check on Duster, who had grown restless at the sound. As night fell, the rain finally began to ease. They shared the last of Vincent's provisions, some dried fruit and more hardtack, and discussed their plans for the next day. "Once we reach Benton, I'll take you to Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house," Vincent said. "She's a good woman, keeps a respectable place for ladies. You'll be safe there while you figure out your next steps." "And if Whitley's men track me there?" Delilah asked, voicing the fear that had been her constant companion. Vincent's expression hardened. "Then they'll have to deal with me, and I'm not the only one in Benton who'd stand against the likes of Whitley. Sheriff Donovan is as honest as they come, and he doesn't take kindly to men who threaten women." Delilah wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her caution. "I don't want to bring trouble to your town, Vince, or to you." "Trouble finds its own way," he replied philosophically. "Besides, I've faced worse than Thomas Whitley and lived to tell the tale." There was a story there, Delilah sensed, but Vincent didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. Everyone carried their secrets in this harsh land. As they prepared to sleep, the limited space in the cave meant they had to lie closer together than on previous nights. Delilah found herself strangely aware of Vincent's proximity, of the steady rhythm of his breathing and the occasional shifting of his position. It had been so long since she'd been near a man without feeling fear that the lack of it now was almost disorienting. In the darkest part of the night, she awoke to find herself trembling, caught in the grip of a nightmare where Whitley's hands were on her again. Without a word, Vincent gently covered her with his coat, his presence reassuring rather than threatening. "It's all right," he murmured, keeping his distance but offering comfort nonetheless. "You're safe." Delilah took a shaky breath, reality reasserting itself. "I'm sorry to wake you. No need for apologies." In the faint glow of the dying fire, his eyes were kind. "Nightmares are old friends of mine, too." This simple admission of vulnerability from a man who seemed so capable touched something in Delilah's heart. They talked quietly for a while, inconsequential things, memories of better times, until her eyelids grew heavy once more and she drifted back to sleep, this time without dreams. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. They set out early, both aware that this would likely be their last full day of traveling together before reaching Benton. The landscape grew increasingly familiar to Vincent, who pointed out landmarks and shared stories connected to them. That ridge there had a run-in with a mountain lion 3 years back. Nearly got the better of me before I could get a shot off. And that stream we're crossing best trout fishing in the territory, according to my uncle, though I've yet to verify his claim. Delilah listened, asking questions and absorbing this glimpse into Vincent's life. With each passing mile, she found herself increasingly reluctant to reach their destination, though she couldn't quite articulate why even to herself. Midday found them stopping in a lush valley where Duster could graze on the abundant grass while they rested. Vincent had been quiet for the last hour, seemingly lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts," Delilah finally said, curious about his unusual silence. Vincent looked up, momentarily startled, then offered a rueful smile. "Just thinking about what awaits in Benton. There's much to be done at the ranch, repairs to make before winter comes, cattle to tend to." "You'll be busy," Delilah observed. "Yes." He hesitated, then added, "Though I find myself wishing for a few more days on the trail, strangely enough." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Delilah felt a flush rise to her cheeks and looked away, suddenly fascinated by a wildflower blooming nearby. "It's been a pleasant journey despite the circumstances," she finally said, the words inadequate for the emotion stirring within her. Vincent nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly before he stood, offering a hand to help her up. "We should get moving if we want to reach Benton by nightfall." They rode on, the miles passing beneath Duster's steady hoofbeats. By late afternoon, Vincent pointed to a plume of smoke visible in the distance. "Benton," he said. "Not much to look at compared to Cheyenne or the cities back east, but it's home." As they drew closer, Delilah could make out scattered buildings, a main street with a dozen or so businesses, a small church with a white steeple, and houses spread out around them. Beyond the town proper, ranches and farms dotted the landscape, including, she assumed, Vincent's property. The sun was setting as they finally rode down Benton's main street. Despite the late hour, several townsfolk were still about, and many called greetings to Vincent as they passed. "James, good to see you back. Vince, thought the wolves might have got you." Vincent responded with easy familiarity to each, though he didn't stop to chat, clearly intent on getting Delilah settled before nightfall completely claimed the day. They stopped outside a 2-story clapboard house set slightly back from the street, with a neat garden in front and curtained windows that glowed with welcoming lamplight. "Mrs. Abernathy's," Vincent explained as he dismounted, and then helped Delilah down. Before they could reach the door, it swung open to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with bright eyes and a warm smile. "Vincent James. About time you showed your face in town again," she called, wiping her hands on her apron as she came down the steps to greet them. Her eyes fell on Delilah, curiosity evident in her expression. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Delilah Hayes," Vincent said. "She's in need of lodging, and I told her yours was the finest establishment in Benton." The older woman beamed at the compliment before turning a kind but assessing gaze on Delilah. "Any friend of Vincent's is welcome here, dear, though you look like you could use a hot bath and a proper meal more than anything." "That sounds wonderful," Delilah admitted, suddenly aware of how she must appear after days on the trail. Vincent cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes has had some trouble back in Cheyenne, men who might come looking for her. I'd consider it a personal favor if you'd keep an eye out and let me know of any strangers asking after her." Understanding dawned in Mrs. Abernathy's eyes, and she nodded firmly. "I see. Well, they'll get nothing from me, I can promise you that, and my shotgun still works just fine." "I knew I could count on you, madam," Vincent said with genuine gratitude. Mrs. Abernathy took Delilah's arm. "Come along, dear. Let's get you settled while Vincent tends to his horse. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." Delilah hesitated, turning back to Vincent. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "No thanks needed," he replied, his voice equally low. "I'll come by tomorrow, see how you're settling in. Maybe show you around town a bit if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Delilah said, a smile touching her lips for the first time since they'd entered Benton. With a nod and a tip of his hat, Vincent led Duster away toward the livery stable at the end of the street. Delilah watched him go for a moment before allowing Mrs. Abernathy to usher her inside. The boarding house was clean and comfortable, with simple but tasteful furnishings. Mrs. Abernathy showed Delilah to a small room on the second floor, overlooking the garden at the back of the house. "Bathrooms down the hall," the older woman explained. "I'll have hot water brought up for you. Dinner's in an hour, but take your time getting settled." Left alone, Delilah sank onto the bed, the events of the past days catching up with her all at once. She was safe for now, at least, but what came next? She had no money, no possessions beyond the clothes on her back, and a dangerous man potentially still looking for her. And then there was Vincent, the cowboy who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. The man whose quiet strength and kindness had begun to heal something broken inside her. What did she feel for him? And more importantly, what could come of it, given her circumstances? These questions still swirled in her mind later that night as she lay in a real bed for the first time in days, clean and well-fed thanks to Mrs. Abernathy's hospitality. Sleep eventually claimed her, and for once, her dreams were peaceful. The next morning, Delilah awoke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the sounds of Benton coming to life outside her window. After dressing in clothes, Mrs. Abernathy had loaned her slightly too large but clean and respectable. She made her way downstairs to the dining room. Several other boarders were already seated at the long table, and Mrs. Abernathy made quick introductions as she served a hearty breakfast of flapjacks, eggs, and bacon. There was Miss Peterson, the new schoolteacher, Mr. Collins, who worked at the bank, and elderly Mrs. Winters, who had lived at the boarding house since her husband died 3 years prior. All were welcoming, though clearly curious about the newcomer. Delilah provided a simplified version of her story. She'd been working in Cheyenne, but had decided to seek opportunities elsewhere, and Vincent James had kindly offered her a ride to Benton when they happened to be traveling in the same direction. After breakfast, Mrs. Abernathy pulled Delilah aside. "Vincent stopped by early this morning while you were still asleep. Said he had business at the bank but would return around 10 to show you the town, if you're feeling up to it." Delilah glanced at the clock on the mantel. It was 9:45 now. "Yes, I'd like that," she said, ignoring the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. "Good. Oh, and he left this for you." Mrs. Abernathy handed over a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Said you might have need of it." Curious, Delilah unwrapped the package to find a small pistol, a derringer, and a box of ammunition. A note in Vincent's neat handwriting accompanied it. "Miss Hayes, I hope you never need to use this, but a woman should be able to protect herself in this territory. I'll show you how to handle it properly if you wish. V.J." Delilah stared at the weapon, touched by Vincent's thoughtfulness and practicality. It represented something she'd never had before, the means to defend herself rather than relying on the mercy of others. Exactly at 10, there was a knock at the front door. Mrs. Abernathy answered it, and Delilah heard Vincent's deep voice greeting her warmly. Taking a deep breath, Delilah tucked the derringer into the pocket of her borrowed skirt and went to meet him. Vincent stood in the entryway, hat in hand. He'd clearly taken time with his appearance. His clothes were clean, his hair neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard. For a moment, seeing him in this civilized setting rather than on the trail, Delilah was struck anew by how handsome he was. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied the formality. "I thought you might appreciate a tour of our little town, such as it is." "I would indeed, Mr. James," she replied, matching his tone while offering a small smile. Mrs. Abernathy watched their exchange with barely concealed interest. "Don't keep her out too long, Vincent. The poor girl's still recovering from her journey." "Yes, madam," Vincent agreed solemnly. "I'll have her back for lunch." Outside, the late summer sun bathed Benton in golden light. Main Street was busy with wagons, riders, and pedestrians going about their business. Vincent offered Delilah his arm, which she accepted after only a brief hesitation. "Thank you for the gift," she said quietly as they walked, "though I hope I won't need it." "As do I," Vincent replied. "But hope is best accompanied by preparation, in my experience." They strolled down the boardwalk, Vincent pointing out the various establishments: the general store, the barber shop, the small hotel, and the Silverbuckle saloon, which he noted with a slight grimace was best avoided by respectable ladies. The townspeople they passed nodded respectfully to Vincent, many stopping to exchange greetings and cast curious glances at Delilah. It was clear that Vincent was well regarded in Benton. "Everyone seems to know you," Delilah observed. "Small town," Vincent replied with a shrug. "And my uncle was something of a local character. I inherited some of his reputation along with his ranch." They paused outside a storefront with a sign reading Benton Mercantile. Through the window, Delilah could see shelves stocked with all manner of goods, from foodstuffs to fabric to farming implements. "Mrs. Wilcox owns this place," Vincent explained. "Her husband died in the war and she's run it single-handedly ever since. Rumor has it she's looking for help. Thought you might be interested, given what you said about being good with numbers." Delilah looked at him in surprise. "You've been making inquiries on my behalf." A slight flush colored Vincent's cheeks. "Just mentioned to a few folks that a capable young woman might be looking for honest work." Word spreads fast in Benton. Before Delilah could respond, the door to the mercantile opened and a tall, thin woman with iron-gray hair and shrewd eyes emerged. "Thought I heard your voice out here, Vincent James," she said, her tone brisk but not unfriendly. Her gaze shifted to Delilah. "And this must be the young lady Mrs. Abernathy mentioned at church yesterday." "Mrs. Wilcox, may I present Miss Delilah Hayes," Vincent said formally. "Miss Hayes, Mrs. Alina Wilcox." Delilah offered her hand. "Pleased to meet you, madam, Mrs." Wilcox's handshake was firm, her assessment direct. "Vincent tells me you're good with figures and have a head for business." "I've kept books before, yes," Delilah said carefully, "and I learn quickly." Mrs. Wilcox nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw. "Come by tomorrow morning if you're interested. 9 o'clock sharp. We'll see if you're a good fit for the mercantile." With that, she nodded to them both and retreated back into her store. "That went well," Vincent said with a small smile as they continued their walk. "Mrs. Wilcox doesn't suffer fools or lazy workers. Her approval isn't easily earned." "You didn't have to do that," Delilah said softly. "Fine work for me, I mean." "I merely mentioned your availability," Vincent corrected. "You'll earn the position on your own merits." They continued their tour, eventually reaching the edge of town where the church stood. It was a simple white clapboard building with a steeple that seemed to reach for the endless Wyoming sky. "Pastor Miller holds services every Sunday," Vincent explained. "Good man, though his sermons tend to run long when he gets inspired." Delilah smiled at that, then grew more serious. "Vince, There's something I've been meaning to ask about what might happen if Whitley's men track me here. Vincent's expression sobered. I spoke with Sheriff Donovan this morning. Without going into details, I let him know that you might have trouble following you. He's a good lawman, he'll keep an eye out for strangers in town. But if they do come, Delilah pressed, I don't want you or anyone else in Benton risking their lives for me. Vincent stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Delilah, listen to me. You're not alone in this anymore. This town looks after its own. I'm not one of your own, she pointed out. I only just arrived. A smile touched Vincent's lips. You arrived with me. As far as Benton's concerned, that makes you one of us now. Something warm unfurled in Delilah's chest at his words. For so long, she'd been adrift, belonging nowhere and to no one except as a possession. The idea of being part of a community, of being protected simply because it was right rather than because she was owned, was almost too much to comprehend. They were interrupted by the church bell tolling 11, reminding them of the passing time. I promised to have you back for lunch, Vincent said, but perhaps you'd allow me to call on you this evening. There's something I'd like to show you. I'd like that, Delilah replied, surprised by how much she meant it. They walked back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Abernathy was waiting with a knowing smile that suggested she saw more than either of them might wish. I'll come by around 6, Vincent said as they parted at the door. Wear something warm. Evenings can be cool this time of year. The afternoon passed slowly for Delilah, who found herself anticipating Vincent's return with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. After lunch, she helped Mrs. Abernathy with household chores, grateful for the distraction and the chance to feel useful. Around 4, Mrs. Abernathy presented her with a dress simple but well made, in a soft blue fabric that complemented Delilah's eyes. My daughter left it behind when she moved to Denver, the older woman explained when Delilah protested the generosity. It's just gathering dust in the closet and you're about her size. Please take it. Touched, Delilah accepted the gift. By 6, she was ready, the blue dress fitting well enough after minor adjustments, her hair neatly arranged, and a borrowed shawl around her shoulders for warmth. Vincent arrived punctually, this time mounted on Duster, with a second, smaller horse, a dappled gray mare in tow. Hope you don't mind riding, he said after greetings were exchanged. It's a bit of a journey to where we're going. Not at all, Delilah replied, glad for her choice of the split riding skirt Mrs. Abernathy had also loaned her, hidden beneath the drape of the blue dress. Vincent helped her mount the gray mare, his hands strong and steady at her waist. This is Juniper, he explained, patting the horse's neck. Gentlest mare in the territory. She belongs to my neighbor, Mrs. Thornton, who was kind enough to lend her for the evening. They rode out of town, following a trail that wound westward into gently rolling hills. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber, the long shadows of late summer stretching across the plains. Where are we going? Delilah asked after they'd been riding for about 20 minutes. You'll see, Vincent replied, a hint of mystery in his smile. It's not much further. True to his word, they soon crested a hill to find a sight that took Delilah's breath away. Below them lay a valley, lush with late summer grasses and wildflowers, bisected by a meandering stream that caught the light of the setting sun like a ribbon of molten gold. On a gentle rise in the midst of this natural paradise stood a house not large, but solidly built, with a wide porch and several outbuildings nearby. A small herd of cattle grazed peacefully in a nearby pasture. Your ranch, Delilah said softly, understanding dawning. Vincent nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. The Flying J, as my uncle named it, not the biggest spread in Wyoming, but it's good land. He guided them down into the valley, approaching the house at a leisurely pace that allowed Delilah to take in the details of what was clearly Vincent's pride and joy. As they drew closer, she could see that the house, while sturdy, showed signs of neglect: peeling paint, a sagging step on the porch, shutters that needed repair. "It needs work, as I mentioned," Vincent said, noting her gaze. Uncle Frank was more concerned with the cattle than the house in his later years. "It has good bones," Delilah replied, using his own phrase from days earlier. "Nothing that can't be mended with time and care." Vincent's smile told her he appreciated her understanding. They dismounted, and he led the horses to a small corral near the barn where they could graze. A dog, a rangy, black and white border collie, came bounding around the side of the house, barking joyfully at Vincent's return. "That's Scout," Vincent explained as he bent to greet the excited animal. "Best cattle dog in 3 counties, according to him." Delilah laughed, watching as the dog finished his enthusiastic greeting to Vincent and then approached her more cautiously, tail wagging tentatively. "Hello, Scout," she said softly, extending her hand for the dog to sniff. After a moment's consideration, Scout apparently decided she was acceptable, pushing his head under her palm for petting. "He likes you," Vincent observed. "He's usually more standoffish with strangers." "I'm honored by his approval," Delilah replied with a smile, scratching behind the dog's ears. Vincent led her up to the house, holding the door open for her to enter first. The interior was simple but comfortable: a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area to one side, and doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. Like the exterior, it showed signs of a bachelor's neglect, but the essentials were clean and well-maintained. "It's lovely," Delilah said sincerely, turning to find Vincent watching her reaction with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It could be," he agreed quietly. Then, seeming to catch himself, he moved toward the fireplace. "I thought we might have dinner here if that's acceptable. Nothing fancy, but the view from the porch at sunset is worth seeing." Delilah helped as Vincent prepared a simple meal: salt pork, beans, and biscuits that he somewhat sheepishly admitted were left by his housekeeper, Mrs. Thornton, who came by twice a week to ensure he didn't waste away to nothing on his own cooking. They ate on the porch as promised, seated in weathered but comfortable chairs, watching as the sun sank below the distant mountains in a spectacular display of color. The peaceful beauty of the scene, combined with the simple pleasure of good food and companionable silence, created a moment of perfect contentment that Delilah wished could last forever. "Why did you bring me here, Vince?" she finally asked as darkness settled over the valley and the first stars appeared overhead. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "I wanted you to see it," he finally said. "This place, what I'm building here." He hesitated, then continued, his voice low but clear in the stillness of the evening. "When I found you by that creek, you were running for your life. You'd been treated as property, as less than human. I wanted you to know that there's another way to live, that not all men are like Whitley and his kind." Delilah's heart ached at the simple honesty in his words. "I'm beginning to understand that," she said softly. Vincent turned to look at her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "I know we've only known each other a few days, and I have no right to ask anything of you. But I want you to know that you have choices now, Delilah. Real choices. If you want to work at the Mercantile and make your own way in Benton, I'll support you however I can. If you want to move on to another town or city once you've saved enough, I'll make sure you get there safely." He took a deep breath before continuing. "And if, someday, you might consider, that is, if you ever thought you could." He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically unsure of his words. Understanding dawned on Delilah. Are you asking if I might consider a future here? With you, the directness of her question seemed to steady him. Yes, he said simply. Not now, I know it's too soon and you need time to heal and find your footing. But someday, perhaps, if you wanted to. Delilah was silent, the magnitude of what he was offering washing over her. Not just protection or assistance, but a true partnership, a life built together on this beautiful land. I've never known kindness from a man, she said again, echoing her words from their first night around the campfire. Until you. Vincent's eyes held hers in the gathering darkness. Then let me be the first, he repeated softly. And if you'll allow it, the last. Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming possibility of happiness that suddenly seemed within her grasp. Slowly, she reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand in hers. I think I would like to see what this valley looks like in every season, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. If that's an acceptable answer for now. Vincent's hand tightened around hers, a smile spreading across his face that rivaled the brilliance of the stars now shining above them. It's the best answer I could hope for. They sat in companionable silence for a time, hands entwined, each lost in thoughts of what the future might hold. Eventually, reluctantly, Vincent noted the lateness of the hour. I should get you back to town, he said. Mrs. Abernathy will be wondering where we are, and you have an early meeting with Mrs. Wilcox tomorrow. The ride back to Benton was quiet but comfortable, the silence between them now filled with unspoken promises rather than uncertainty. When they reached the boarding house, Vincent helped Delilah dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Thank you for showing me your home, Delilah said softly. It's a special place. It could be yours too someday, Vincent replied, his voice equally low. If you wanted it to be. Their eyes met in the moonlight, and for a moment Delilah thought he might kiss her. Instead, he respectfully stepped back, though the look in his eyes told her it wasn't for lack of desire. Good night, Delilah. I'll come by tomorrow evening to hear how your meeting with Mrs. Wilcox went. Good night, Vince. I'll look forward to it. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that brought increasing contentment to Delilah's life. Mrs. Wilcox hired her on a trial basis at the Mercantile, and her skill with numbers and natural courtesy with customers soon made her an indispensable part of the store. The work was honest and satisfying, and the modest wages allowed her to begin repaying Mrs. Abernathy for her lodging and to save a little besides. Vincent called on her regularly, sometimes taking her on rides around the countryside, other times simply walking with her through town, or sitting with her on the boarding house porch in the evenings. Their relationship grew gradually, built on mutual respect and an increasingly deep affection that neither felt the need to rush. Benton itself began to feel like home in a way no place had since Delilah's childhood. The townsfolk, initially curious about the newcomer, soon accepted her as one of their own. She sang in the church choir on Sundays, helped with community gatherings, and slowly began to build a life that was truly hers. But the shadow of Thomas Whitley remained. Each time a stranger rode into town, Delilah felt a momentary flash of fear. Vincent assured her that with each passing day, the likelihood of Whitley pursuing her diminished. He had other interests to occupy him in Cheyenne, and one escaped woman was hardly worth an extended manhunt. Still, they remained vigilant. Delilah practiced with the derringer until she could hit a target consistently, and she never ventured far from town alone. Sheriff Donovan kept a watchful eye on newcomers, and word had spread among the townsfolk to be alert for men asking questions about her. As autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold, Vincent invited Delilah to Sunday dinner at the ranch. Mrs. Thornton, his housekeeper, would be present as chaperone, he explained somewhat awkwardly, to ensure propriety. The meal was pleasant with Mrs. Thornton, a widow in her 50s, with a no-nonsense manner and quick laugh, providing lively conversation. After dinner, she tactfully busied herself with dishes while Vincent showed Delilah the improvements he'd made to the house since her first visit: repaired shutters, fresh paint on the porch, and new curtains that Mrs. Thornton had insisted were long overdue. "You've been working hard," Delilah observed as they walked the property, Scout trotting faithfully at their heels. "Winter comes early in these parts," Vincent replied. "Wanted to get the place weathertight before the first snow." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "And I wanted it to look its best for you." Delilah's heart warmed at his words. Over the weeks their feelings for each other had deepened, though neither had yet put them into explicit terms. Vincent was careful never to press her, always giving her space to make her own choices, and she appreciated his patience more than he knew. As they walked back toward the house, Vincent suddenly stopped, his posture alerting Delilah that something was wrong before she saw it herself: a plume of dust on the distant road, indicating riders approaching. "Get inside," Vincent said quietly but firmly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Tell Mrs. Thornton to fetch my rifle from above the fireplace." Delilah hurried to do as he asked, her heart pounding. Mrs. Thornton, sensing the urgency, asked no questions as she retrieved the Winchester rifle and handed it to Delilah to take back outside. Vincent stood on the porch, watching the approaching riders. There were 3 of them, Delilah could now see, moving at a steady pace that suggested purpose rather than casual travel. "Could be nothing," Vincent said as she handed him the rifle. "But best to be prepared. Stay behind me." As the riders drew closer, Delilah's blood ran cold. She recognized one of them, Bill Harker, Whitley's right-hand man and the one who'd been tasked with bringing her back when she first escaped. "It's them," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "The one in front, that's Harker. He works for Whitley." Vincent's expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. "Go inside with Mrs. Thornton. Bolt the door. If shooting starts, get down on the floor away from windows." "Vince, please, Delilah. I can handle this better if I'm not worrying about you being in the line of fire." Reluctantly, she retreated inside where Mrs. Thornton waited, the older woman's face set in grim determination. "There's another rifle in the back bedroom," she said matter-of-factly, "and I'm a better shot than Vincent gives me credit for." Despite her fear, Delilah felt a surge of gratitude for the stalwart woman. Together, they watched through the window as the riders approached the house and stopped a respectful distance away. "Afternoon," Harker called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Looking for a woman named Delilah Hayes. Heard she might be in these parts." "May I ask why you're looking for her?" Vincent replied, his tone neutral though his stance was anything but relaxed. Harker shifted in his saddle. "She's wanted back in Cheyenne. Stole from her employer before running off. Mr. Whitley's offering a reward for her return." "That's so." Vincent's voice remained steady. "Strange. I heard a different story, about a woman who was being held against her will and escaped before worse could happen to her." Harker's expression darkened. "Don't know what tales she's been spinning, mister, but Whitley has the law on his side in Cheyenne. Now, we know she's been seen in Benton. Just tell us where to find her and we'll be on our way." "Can't help you," Vincent said firmly. "Suggest you move on." The 2 men with Harker exchanged glances, their hands moving closer to their holstered weapons. Tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. "Don't reckon you want trouble," Harker said, his voice hardening. "But we ain't leaving without the girl." Inside the house, Delilah's hand closed around the derringer in her pocket. She wouldn't let Vincent die defending her. If it came to it, she would face Harker herself. Before the standoff could escalate further, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. Coming up the road at a gallop was Sheriff Donovan, accompanied by 3 other men from town that Delilah recognized Mr. Collins from the boarding house, the blacksmith whose name she couldn't recall, and Dr. Patterson, who despite his profession was known to be handy with a rifle. Relief flooded through her at the sight. The sheriff must have spotted Whitley's men passing through town and guessed their destination. Harker and his companions clearly hadn't expected this development. Their advantage of numbers suddenly reversed. They shifted uneasily as Sheriff Donovan rode up alongside Vincent. "Problem here, James?" the sheriff asked, though his eyes remained fixed on the strangers. "These gentlemen are looking for someone," Vincent replied. "Told them I couldn't help." Sheriff Donovan nodded, then addressed Harker directly. "I'm Sheriff Matthew Donovan. This is my jurisdiction, and I don't recall inviting you into it. State your business officially." Harker's confidence visibly wavered in the face of official opposition. "Looking for a woman named Delilah Hayes. She's wanted in Cheyenne for theft." "Got a warrant?" Donovan asked mildly. Harker hesitated. "Well, no, but then you've got no official business here," Donovan cut him off. "Now, I suggest you boys turn around and head back to Cheyenne. Tell Whitley if he wants to pursue this, he can come himself with proper paperwork. Though I should warn you," his voice hardened, "Wyoming territory's a big place, and the law works differently outside Cheyenne, especially when it comes to how women should be treated." The implication was clear. Whitley's influence didn't extend this far, and any underhanded tactics would be met with resistance. For a tense moment, it seemed Harker might push the issue. Then, with a muttered curse, he yanked his horse around. "This ain't over," he spat, but the threat sounded hollow even to Delilah's ears. The 3 riders departed at a canter, dust rising in their wake. Only when they were well down the road did Vincent lower his rifle. "Much obliged, Sheriff," he said, offering his hand to Donovan. The lawman shook it firmly. Mrs. Wilcox saw them ride through town asking questions, figured they might be headed this way since it's no secret you and Miss Hayes have been keeping company. He glanced toward the house. "She all right?" "Yes," Delilah said, stepping onto the porch now that the danger had passed. "Thanks to all of you." Sheriff Donovan tipped his hat. "Just doing my job, madam, but you should know word's spread about your situation. The folks in Benton have taken a liking to you. Anyone comes looking to cause trouble will find more than they bargained for." The simple statement, delivered matter-of-factly, brought tears to Delilah's eyes. For so long, she'd been alone, with no one to stand beside her. Now, an entire community had rallied to her defense. After the sheriff and his companions departed, promising to keep an eye out for Harker's return, Vincent turned to Delilah, concern etched on his features. "Are you truly all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her hands still trembled slightly. "I was afraid for you, standing out there alone." A small smile touched his lips. "I'm tougher than I look, and it seems I wasn't alone for long." Mrs. Thornton, who had witnessed the entire exchange from inside, emerged onto the porch. "I think we all could use some coffee," she announced pragmatically. "And perhaps something stronger for those with the inclination." That evening, after returning Delilah safely to the boarding house with a promise to call on her the next day, Vincent rode back out to his ranch alone, his mind troubled. The confrontation with Whitley's men had brought home how precarious Delilah's situation remained. While Harker had retreated today, there was no guarantee Whitley wouldn't pursue the matter further, perhaps with more men or through official channels. As he tended to Duster and the other animals for the night, Vincent considered his options. More than anything, he wanted to protect Delilah, to give her the security she deserved. But he also respected her independence, her need to stand on her own after being controlled by others for so long. His feelings for her had grown steadily over the weeks since they'd met, from initial compassion to deep admiration, and now to something he could only call love. Yet he'd held back from declaring himself fully, wanting her to feel truly free to choose her own path. Today's events, however, had clarified something for him. Life was unpredictable, especially in the frontier territories. If he truly loved Delilah, he needed to be honest about his feelings, to offer her not just protection but partnership if she wanted it. With this resolution firmly in mind, Vincent completed his evening chores and turned in for the night, already planning what he would say when he saw her tomorrow. In Benton, Delilah lay awake in her room at the boarding house, her own thoughts in turmoil. The appearance of Harker and his men had shattered the sense of security she'd been building. Would she ever truly be free of Whitley and the threat he represented? More than that, seeing Vincent standing alone against 3 armed men had crystallized her feelings for him in a way nothing else could have. The thought of losing him, this man who had shown her what true kindness looked like, was unbearable. She had been cautious with her heart, afraid to trust too quickly after all she'd endured. But life on the frontier taught harsh lessons about the brevity and uncertainty of existence. If today had shown her anything, it was that some risks were worth taking. With this thought, Delilah finally drifted into sleep, her dreams filled not with the usual nightmares of her past, but with visions of a future she was beginning to believe might actually be possible. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the first real hint of winter in the air. Delilah went to work at the mercantile as usual, though Mrs. Wilcox, having heard about the previous day's excitement, insisted she stay inside the store rather than making deliveries, as she sometimes did. Around noon, Vincent appeared, his expression serious as he asked if she might be free to walk with him during her lunch break. Mrs. Wilcox, watching them with knowing eyes, immediately granted permission, shooing them out with instructions to take their time. They walked in companionable silence for a while, eventually finding themselves at the small park near the church, where a few benches offered a place to rest beneath ancient cottonwood trees now shedding their golden leaves. "I've been thinking," Vincent said as they sat, his voice carefully measured, "about what happened yesterday." "So have I," Delilah admitted. "Whitley may not give up so easily," Vincent continued, "even with the sheriff and the town standing with us." Delilah nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know. I've put everyone in danger by staying here." Vincent's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "That's not what I meant. This is your home now, Delilah. No one wants you to leave." He took a deep breath. "Especially not me." She looked up, meeting his earnest gaze. "Vince, please let me finish," he said gently. "I've been thinking about this for some time, not just since yesterday. I've been careful not to rush you, knowing what you've been through, wanting you to feel truly free to make your own choices." He shifted on the bench to face her more directly. "But I realize now that by holding back, I might have made you think my feelings were less than they are. The truth is, Delilah Hayes, I've fallen in love with you. Not just because of how brave you are, or how kind to everyone you meet, or how you've taken to life here in Benton as if you were born to it, though all those things are true." His voice softened. "I love you because when I'm with you, I feel like I've found the other half of myself. The part that makes everything else make sense." Delilah felt tears welling in her eyes, but for once, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Oh, Vince, I'm not asking for an answer right away," he hurried on. "I just wanted you to know where I stand." If you need more time, or if your feelings aren't the same, I'll understand. Nothing has to change if you don't want it to." Delilah couldn't help but laugh softly at his earnest reassurances, even as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Vincent James, are you going to let me speak at all?" A rueful smile touched his lips. "Sorry, guess I'm more nervous than I thought." Delilah turned her hand beneath his, lacing their fingers together. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I have since that first night by the fire when you said let me be the first to show you kindness. You kept that promise in every way possible." The joy that spread across Vincent's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual at first, then suddenly brilliant. "Truly, truly," she confirmed, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "Yesterday, when I saw you facing those men alone, I realized how much I couldn't bear to lose you. Life is too uncertain to waste time being afraid to love." Vincent's free hand rose to gently touch her cheek, brushing away the tears that lingered there. "Delilah," he said softly, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not just for protection or security, but because I want to build a life with you, a true partnership?" "Yes," Delilah answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." His smile was radiant as he leaned forward, pausing just a breath away to ask permission with his eyes. At her slight nod, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "This wasn't exactly how I planned to ask." Delilah laughed softly. "I don't need a ring, just you." They sat together on the bench for a long time, talking of the future they would build together, not just as a refuge from the past, but as something new and beautiful in its own right. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Benton, met with universal approval and not a small amount of satisfaction from those who had watched their courtship unfold. Mrs. Abernathy insisted on hosting a small celebration at the boarding house, and Mrs. Wilcox closed the mercantile early to attend. They were married 3 weeks later in the white church at the edge of town, with Pastor Miller officiating, and what seemed like the entire population of Benton in attendance. Delilah wore a dress of ivory silk that the women of the town had helped alter from one of Mrs. Thornton's treasured heirlooms. Vincent, in a new suit that made him look both distinguished and slightly uncomfortable, couldn't take his eyes off his bride. Sheriff Donovan stood as Vincent's best man, a fitting choice given his role in their story. Mrs. Abernathy, who had become like a mother to Delilah, gave her away. The simple ceremony concluded with Pastor Miller's pronouncement and Vincent's tender kiss, sealed with cheers and well wishes from their friends and neighbors. The celebration afterward at the town hall lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice their number. As night fell, Vincent drove a wagon loaded with Delilah's few belongings back to the Flying J, now their shared home. Mrs. Thornton had discreetly departed earlier, leaving the house spotlessly clean with a hot meal waiting on the stove and fresh flowers on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. James," Vincent said softly as he carried Delilah across the threshold, honoring the old tradition. "It's good to be home," she replied, her arms around his neck, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. That night, they discovered a new kind of intimacy, one built on mutual trust, respect, and deep love. Vincent's tenderness and patience helped heal the last of Delilah's fears, his gentle touch erasing the memory of harsher hands. In the quiet aftermath, lying in each other's arms as moonlight spilled through the window, Delilah marveled at the journey that had brought her here from desperate flight to profound belonging. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I never imagined happiness like this was possible," she answered truthfully. "That I'm grateful for every step that led me here, even the painful ones." Vincent's arms tightened around her. "No one will ever hurt you again," he promised. "Not while I draw breath." She raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "I know, but it's more than that. You've shown me that I'm strong enough to stand on my own and that I don't have to." The winter passed in a haze of newlywed bliss, the harsh Wyoming weather keeping them often homebound, but never restless in each other's company. Delilah continued working at the mercantile 3 days a week, having discovered she enjoyed the work and the connection it gave her to the community. Vincent focused on improving the ranch, preparing for spring calving and planning expansions to the house. On Christmas morning, Delilah surprised Vincent with news that left him speechless with joy. She was expecting their first child, due in the summer. Their celebration was quiet but profound, filled with whispered dreams of the family they would build together. As spring brought new life to the land, there came news from Cheyenne that Thomas Whitley had finally overreached himself, attempting to bribe a federal marshal and finding himself arrested for his trouble. His saloon and other businesses were sold to pay his debts, and he was sentenced to 5 years in a federal prison back east. The shadow that had lingered at the edges of Delilah's happiness was finally, truly gone. Their son, Frank James, named for Vincent's uncle, was born on a warm July evening in 1877, with Dr. Patterson attending and Mrs. Thornton assisting. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cry. Vincent, holding his son for the first time, looked at Delilah with such love it nearly overwhelmed her. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For this, for everything." "Thank you," she replied, reaching out to touch his cheek, "for being the first man to show me kindness and for being the one who taught me what love truly means." In the years that followed, the Flying J prospered under their joint care. The house was expanded to accommodate their growing family. Frank was joined by a sister, Margaret, 2 years later, and another brother, Thomas, named not for Whitley but for Vincent's father, 2 years after that. Delilah's natural business acumen complemented Vincent's ranching skills, and together they built one of the most successful operations in the county. Their home became known for its hospitality, often hosting community gatherings and serving as a stopping place for travelers passing through. The wounds of Delilah's past never fully disappeared, but they faded into scars that no longer pained her. In their place grew a confidence born of love freely given and received, of a life built on mutual respect and shared dreams. On their 10th anniversary, Vincent presented Delilah with a journal bound in soft leather. Inside, he had written their story from that first meeting by the creek to the present day, intending it as a legacy for their children to understand the journey that had brought their parents together. On the first page he had inscribed, "To Delilah, who taught me that true strength lies in gentleness and true courage in opening your heart despite fear. And to our children, that they may know how love can transform even the darkest past into a future filled with light." As they sat on their porch that evening, watching their children play in the yard with an aging scout and his younger canine companion, Delilah reflected on how far she had come from the frightened young woman who had stumbled into Vincent's campsite all those years ago. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder, "what would have happened if you hadn't been camped by that creek that night?" Vincent considered the question, his arm warm around her waist. "I don't believe in coincidences," he finally said. "I think we were meant to find each other, one way or another." Delilah smiled, watching as their oldest son showed his younger siblings how to throw a lasso, his serious expression so like his father's it made her heart swell. "I used to believe that kindness was rare in this world," she said softly. "You proved me wrong about that, and about so much else." Vincent pressed a kiss to her temple. "You were worth proving wrong." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in colors no artist could capture, Delilah James knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety or security, but true belonging in this place, with this man, in the life they had built together. It had begun with a simple offer: "Let me be the first," to show kindness to a woman who had known only its absence. It had blossomed into a love that had healed old wounds, created new life, and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And that, Delilah thought as she turned to meet her husband's loving gaze, was the greatest gift of all.